Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news. You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Here in Washington, a lot of attention is fixed on what's taking place in the Senate today, or more specifically, the Dirksen Senate Office Building, where the Senate Armed Services Committee is currently, and it's still underway, holding the confirmation hearing for the Defense Secretary-designate Pete Hegseth, who, of course, has been tapped by President-elect Donald Trump to lead the Pentagon, an organization with more than 3 million people reporting up and through it. And it's been a little contentious at times. Perhaps no surprise, he's faced very difficult questions from Democrats in regard to a number of issues, but he also began the hearing by pleading his own case. Here's part of his opening statement.
Now, it is true and has been acknowledged that I don't have a similar biography to defense secretaries of the last 30 years. But as President Trump also told me, we've repeatedly placed people atop the Pentagon with supposedly the right credentials, whether they are retired generals, academics, or defense contractor executives. And where has it gotten us? He believes, and I humbly agree, that it's time to give someone with dust on his boots the helm. A change agent, someone with no vested interest in certain companies or specific programs or approved narratives. My only special interest is the warfighter. Deterring wars, and if called upon, winning wars by ensuring our warriors never enter a fair fight. We let them win, and we bring them home. Like many of my generation, I've been there. I've led troops in combat. I've been on patrol for days. I've pulled a trigger downrange, heard bullets whiz by, flex-cuffed insurgents, called in close air support, led medevacs, dodged IEDs, pulled out dead bodies, and knelt before a battlefield cross. This is not academic for me. This is my life. I led then, and I will lead now.
Pete Hegseth speaking before the Senate Armed Services Committee in prepared remarks. That's how it started. Not only trying to make the case for his nomination and confirmation, of course, but also trying to get ahead of some of the more difficult questions that he might be asked, and he's been asked all of them. And we've got more to go here. Joining us, a voice of experience who spent a lot of time with this committee and in rooms like these, retired Marine Corps Major General Arnold Punaro, former staff director of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the author of If Confirmed, an insider's view of the Senate confirmation process. What a perfect voice for today. General, it's been some time, and we welcome you back to Bloomberg TV and radio. As I mentioned, you've been in this room before. How's he doing?
Well, I think he's doing extremely well. I was very impressed with his opening statement. As you mentioned, I've been involved in the confirmation process for over 12 Secretaries of Defense, going all the way back to the Ford administration, both when I was on the committee, the staff director of the committee, and then helping various nominees since leaving government on a pro bono basis. And so most of our Secretaries of Defense face tough questionings, but he certainly had a very strong opening statement. I've reviewed all of his advanced policy questions. I've listened very carefully to the hearing, and he's doing exceedingly well, in my judgment.
Well, and for many of the questions he is facing, at least the ones posed by Democrats, he's kind of doing so for the first time, as multiple Democratic senators have pointed out, sir, that Hegseth declined to meet with them in advance of this hearing, even though he was taking meetings with essentially all of the Republicans on this committee. Do you think that that was a mistake, or was it unnecessary in this case when he wasn't likely to be able to rely on Democratic votes anyway?
Well, typically the tradition is that nominees, and not just for the Secretary of Defense, all our defense nominees, of which there are 65 in the Department of Defense. So he's going to have a very strong team with him if he's confirmed, and I believe he will be confirmed. And typically they try to meet with everybody, but everybody's schedules. I don't have any inside information other than what I just heard in the hearing today. I know nominees try to meet with everybody. I know for a fact that a number of the other nominees, the Secretary of the Navy, the Secretary of the Army nominee, they're meeting with both sides of the aisle. So I don't know what really happened here. It's unfortunate if he didn't have a chance to meet with some of them. But on the other hand, it's not unusual that schedules don't match up.
Yeah, they do all seem to be going out of their way to say the same thing on that front. But General, we'd love for you to bring us behind the scenes a bit and into the process. We hear a lot about mock hearings and murder boards. What goes into preparing someone like Pete Hegseth for a moment like this? How much time do you spend with him? How ugly does it get when you start looking at their record and try to give them a sense of the tough questions they're going to get?
Well, you know, I go back, and most of the sec defs that I've been involved with, going all the way back to Harold Brown in the Carter administration,
Yep.
Cap Weinberger, Don Rumsfeld, Les Aspin, all got tough questions. So there's nothing unusual about that. Number two, it does take a tremendous amount of preparation. Some of the previous secretaries of defense that didn't prepare well did not do well in their confirmation hearing. And frankly, they suffered from that when they became, even though they got confirmed, they did not have a good impression in the confirmation hearing. So I would assume, and I can tell from just the way he's answering the questions, I can tell from all the material, supporting material that's been provided to the committee, I can tell by reading his extensive advanced policy questions, they have done a tremendous amount of preparation to get him ready for this hearing. But that's appropriate. You need to do that. As some people have said, the Defense Department is the largest, most complex organization in the world, and it's all about war fighting. And so I would think that obviously they spent a tremendous amount of time with him, getting him ready, and it shows he's doing a good job.
So you think, General, that he's doing a good job in arguing that he is in fact qualified to do this job, even though he's, as has been raised in the hearing, he hasn't managed an organization bigger than hundreds of people, let alone millions, that he actually hasn't led an organizational audit, let alone one that could number in the hundreds of billions of dollars? I mean, is your takeaway from this hearing that Pete Hegseth is firmly qualified for this position?
He's qualified in terms of the things that the Secretary of Defense is involved in, and they are in Title 10. Somebody brought up what are the requirements. There are requirements in Title 10, the U.S. code that creates the Department of Defense and the Secretary of Defense. And he brought out the three things that I think are most important. He's focused on improving deterrence because those of us that have been in combat like him, like myself and others, I've been wounded in combat and been to more than one war. You want to deter wars. You don't want to have to engage in wars, and you want to focus on war fighting and lethality. That's the role of the Secretary of Defense. He's going to have, there's 65 confirmed people. They've already named a very strong team to be in there with him. John Phelan to be Secretary of the Navy, Dan Driscoll to be Secretary of the Army, Bridge Colby, a real expert on policy, Mike Duffy, a very tremendous expert in the acquisition area, and the Deputy Feinberg, a very, very successful businessman. And the number two person is the chief operating officer. So the notion that somehow the Secretary of Defense has got to run the Pentagon all by themselves. And plus you've got the service chiefs, you've got the joint chiefs, you've got the warfighting combatant commanders. So in my judgment, it takes that kind of a team. And the names that I've seen so far, because I know most of them and have worked with them over the years, very experienced. It's going to be a very strong team.
General, we all remember John Tower in 1989. I don't know if you have any personal anecdotes from that experience or any firsthand stories, but can you speak to our audience about how rare it would be for a nominee like this to go down in a vote in committee or on the floor?
Well, in history, the only one that has not been approved was John Tower, and that was a very sad day. He was a great chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. The full expectation was that he would be confirmed, but there were issues that came up during the confirmation process, particularly as it relates to the FBI report, that it ended up him not being approved. But the committee and the Congress turned around and the Senate very quickly and put Dick Cheney in very quickly after John Tower's nomination was not approved. And so I think, frankly, the Senate deserves to give Pete Hegseth an up or down vote on day one. He's the only other civilian in the warfighting chain of command, from the commander-in-chief to the combatant commands. We need a Secretary of Defense on there on day one, and he should get an up or down vote, which has been the precedent for Secretaries of Defense. And people that want to vote for him can vote for him. People that want to vote against him, vote against him. And, a majority vote rules. And if he gets a majority vote, then he will be eligible to be sworn in and appointed day one. But he deserves an up or down vote on January 20th. That's been the plan and the precedent going all the way back to Democrat and Republican presidents, that on a new president that has a new Secretary of Defense gets an up or down vote on day one. And I hope that will be the case.
Well, and assuming he is confirmed ultimately to lead this position, talk, if you will, General, about what exactly he's going to inherit. We've heard in this hearing a lot of kind of bureaucratical challenges, if you will, about the acquisition process, about an audit for the DOD. But then there's also the very real challenges in multiple theaters around the world where there are live conflicts or the threat of conflicts. How is he going to be able to navigate both those internal and external questions?
Look, he's inheriting the same challenges that the last 2 or 3 presidents have had. We live in a world that's more dangerous and unstable than the peak of the Cold War. We don't have the right strategy for dealing with the threats that we face from Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and global terrorism. We need to get back to basically being able to deter, and if deterrence fails, to fight and win 2 major theater wars on a near simultaneous basis. We're not getting the bang for the buck we should for the dollars we spend in the Pentagon. In constant dollars, we're spending more than the peak of the Reagan buildup, and the force is 50% smaller. One of the things he brought out today is we need to get people, into the combat arms. And we have over 300,000 active duty military serving in inherently non-governmental jobs. They're serving in the rear with the gear. The overhead in the Pentagon is massive. The requirements process needs reform. The acquisition process needs reform. We spend over $420 billion a year in the Pentagon on goods and services, supplies and equipment. And about the only thing you can say about that output is spend more, take longer, get less. And these problems are well known. He's with his team, going to have to tackle every single one of these. If you want to improve deterrence is really important. You need to have the military capability. It has to be credible, and your adversaries have to believe that you're going to use it. So he's going to inherit some significant challenges in all of these areas.
We're spending some time on Bloomberg TV and radio with retired Marine Corps General Arnold Punaro, who literally wrote the book on Senate confirmations. General, I want to ask you about some criticism that we've heard from Democratic members of the committee about the FBI background check into Pete Hegseth. There are multiple reports here that the FBI did not interview Hegseth's ex-wives or the woman who actually accused him of sexual assault in 2017. How unusual is that? Would that have been riding on a request from committee leadership to look into that and interview those women? Or is this a problem for the FBI to have not been as comprehensive as it should be?
First of all, I want to applaud the new leadership in the Senate, the leader Thune and others that said, look, we're going to require the same kind of FBI full-field investigations for the Trump nominees that has been required in every single previous president, Democrat and Republican. And so that request doesn't come from the committees. It doesn't come from the Senate. It comes from the White House counsel's office. In this case, the transition counsel, because their White House counsel for Trump has not been set up till January 20th. And so they had the FBI go out and do what's called a full field investigation of potential nominees. And then that material is provided to the chairman and ranking member on the Senate Armed Services Committee. And it's at the chairman's discretion, as it was when my boss was chairman for 8 years, as to who else might get access to that. One of the things you have to understand, it's not like an inspector general report. It's not like a Article 32 in the military where there's an investigation, their findings and their recommendations, and they come to a conclusion and they say, well, this person is right and this person is wrong. It's just raw investigatory files, and they can be very misleading. And so the FBI reports have to be treated with great deference in terms of what they can be used for. One of the things that I felt, and people know, that was very unfair in the power thing, is there were a lot of things that got leaked out of the FBI report that weren't corroborated, and it was very damaging. And so I think the approach that Chairman Wicker is taking in terms of restricting the FBI report is appropriate. In terms of what's in it, none of us are ever going to know because it's not going to be made available publicly. And certainly you have to rely on the investigatory skills of the FBI that they did a thorough investigation. And so typically what happens is, if the counsel believes there's disqualifying information in an FBI full field investigation, they'll notify the president, and the president will have to decide whether he still wants to go forward or not. The fact that the report was provided to the chairman and ranking member, the fact that things are going forward, I don't have firsthand knowledge. I certainly don't have access to it. I don't have any leaked information. My working assumption would be there's nothing in that report that's disqualifying. Because the proceedings are going forward.
All right, General, thank you so much for joining us on Balance of Power today. That's retired Marine Corps General Arnold Punaro, who, as Joe mentioned, is also the author of If Confirmed, an insider's view of the Senate confirmation process.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. You can also listen live on Amazon Alexa from our flagship New York station. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Confirmation hearing for Pete Hegseth get underway here. Actually, it's soon to draw to a close. It started at 9:30 this morning in the Dirksen Senate office building. 27 senators have an opportunity to ask Pete Hegseth, in some cases, very difficult questions. Kailey, we've heard about his history with alcohol, allegations of sexual assault, to which he maintains his innocence, some emotional testimony from the likes of Tammy Duckworth, some very difficult questions from Elizabeth Warren, lockstep support, though, from Republicans in the room, and many expect him to be confirmed.
Well, and interestingly as well, the one Republican many were keeping an eye on is Senator Joni Ernst from Iowa, who's a combat veteran and sexual assault survivor herself. And even their rapport seemed friendlier than maybe you would have anticipated. She noted that they have met multiple times in private and had what she described as very frank conversations. And she just reiterated on some of the points that I guess they had discussed in private that she wanted to raise again today in the hearing. But she was going to be potentially the linchpin vote on this, knowing only 3 Republican votes can be afforded to be lost for him to get through.
At one time, she was the one to watch, but after their meeting, she seemed to back off. And by the way, a deliberate pressure campaign from the MAGA world against Joni Ernst that seemed to change her narrative, as did her meeting with Pete Hegseth behind closed doors. To your point, Kailey, she actually left time on the clock, which says a lot about the point she was trying to make.
Yeah, so let's get into all of this now and turn to our political panel today. Jeanne Zaino is with us, who, of course, is a senior democracy fellow at the Center for the Study of the Presidency and Congress and a Democratic strategist alongside Republican strategist Ashley Davis. Welcome to you both. Jeanne, just to begin with you, obviously Democrats had coordinated their questioning here. Much of it was incredibly intense, is that they went after Hegseth on both character and qualifications for this job. But is anyone's mind really changing because of this Q&A?
I don't think we see that yet. Could it happen? Sure. But I don't think that there has been a misstep of the degree or sort of a surprise that would elicit changes on the Republican side. And part of that, I think, is the pressure campaign that you were both just talking about. There has been an organized pressure campaign from the right to support Hegseth and also to take on any Republicans who would stray offline. So I think so far no mind's changed, but I do think Democrats are doing what they need to do and wanted to do. They are getting their points out. And, I would just add 2 things surprised me. One, that he didn't meet with them in advance or even try to set up a meeting, if you believe what the senators are saying. And number 2, that we're only going to go 1 round on this. It is typical to go more than 1 round. I think we need, as the American public, to hear more from him. But we're only going to get 1 round, 7 minutes each, which is pretty short.
Yeah, 1 round indeed. And I just want to go back to the moment between Pete Hegseth and Joni Ernst that Kailey mentioned here, the senator from Iowa, with questions specifically about women serving in combat.
Will you support women continuing to have the opportunity to serve in combat roles?
Senator, first of all, thank you for your service, as we discussed extensively as well.
It's my privilege.
And my answer is yes, exactly the way that you caveated it. Yes, women will have access to ground combat roles, given the standards remain high, and we'll have a review to ensure the standards have not been eroded in any one of these cases. That'll be part of one of the first things we do at the Pentagon, is reviewing that in a gender-neutral way, the standards, ensuring readiness and meritocracy is front and center. But absolutely, it would be the privilege of a lifetime to, if confirmed, to be the Secretary of Defense for all men and women in uniform who fight so heroic. They have so many other options. They decide to put their right hand up for our country, and it would be an honor to have a chance to lead them.
All right, let's bring Republican strategist Ashley Davis back into the conversation. If that's as tough as it gets from a Republican on the panel, are we all done here?
Pretty much, but I still want to, as I was talking about earlier, I do think we need to watch John Curtis, especially, who came out just a few hours ago saying that he needs to take another look at him as well as Tulsi Gabbard. So I do think that there's that, plus the three that we've always talked about in regards to Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and also Mitch McConnell.
Tell our audience why Mitch McConnell.
Just because Mitch has always had a little bit of a thorn in President Trump's side, and I also think that he takes the stance of the United States and the world, especially in regards to the military, very, very seriously. He is not up for re-election anymore. He's not running, and he's not the majority leader. So he has the ability to vote against someone if he needs to. I'm not saying he will. Sure. He just has those chains have been broken, so to speak. Yeah. But John Curtis, I think, is something to earlier watch. I agree. I don't think that anyone's mind has been changed today. Nothing new came out. Obviously, I thought Tammy Duckworth was probably the strongest on the Democrat side in regards to her personal history. But I just don't think, and obviously Senator Ernst's questions teed him up to answer the question that was very important, which was about obviously women in the military.
As you make the point that Senator Curtis has expressed concerns not just about Hegseth, but Tulsi Gabbard as well, do you see a relationship here where the better this process goes for him, the greater threat that it doesn't go so well for her, because that could potentially open the door for, if Republicans are exercising one pass on shooting down a nominee, it might become her instead of him?
It could be, and will there'll be a sacrificial lamb, so to speak? I mean, obviously RFK is still a concern. I mean, the question here, and obviously Kash Patel as well, but the main question here is some of this FBI background checks that are still happening. So there's obviously a lot of different conversations out there about Tulsi Gabbard, from what I understand, with her ability to get her clearances continue to be extended and confirmed. That I don't know what is there that's not classified, that us as the general public don't know. So I think that she probably is someone that could be a sacrificial lamb, as well as I still think that RFK has an uphill battle.
Yeah, he has to still have a lot of meetings for us to get a better sense of that. Jeanne, I know where you are on Pete Hegseth not meeting with Democrats here. I wonder where you are on the background check. We talked to General Punaro about this earlier in the hour, that many Democrats on the panel have complained that the FBI did not interview Hegseth's ex-wives or the woman who accused him of sexual assault in California in 2017. Those apparently would have needed to be requested by White House counsel. Either way, do they have a full picture of the man?
Well, from what they're saying, they don't. They are also complaining about the late timing in which, these reports are being given to the Senate. And they don't feel like they're getting a full rundown. There was also reporting that his previous wife, one of his ex-wives, reached out to the FBI and didn't get a call back. I think that is worth thinking about. But I think the reality here is that not only do we need more time with Pete Hegseth, I think, as an American public, I think there's also an awful lot of conversation that hasn't been had. I mean, we've heard an awful lot about audits, internal challenges in the DOD, about his issues involving women and other things. But how about issues involving the security of the United States? How about the fact we're losing the race with China in particular when it comes to how we're going to be a 21st century fighting machine? All of these things have sort of gone by the wayside when you give senators 7 minutes each. So to me, I think Republicans could do better in terms of giving their members more time to have more robust conversations with all of these nominees. I understand they want to do this fast, but this is the last time we get to hear this kind of back and forth, and I think we deserve more. So that, abandoning that practice to me is really problematic.
Ashley?
There's two things that I just want to address. So the FBI background checks after a huge slate of cabinet secretaries like this, they always, at least under my experience under the Bush administration, they do come up last minute. Obviously, the same thing I know happened under the Biden administration. The thing that I really want to get into here quickly is going through numerous FBI checks and at various levels. The point is not to call the ex-wife. The point is to call the ex-roommate or the neighbor that you had when you were 25 years old. The FBI's role is to get to the third layer, the fourth layer, not the public information. So it doesn't bother me as much that he didn't talk to the ex-wife. They didn't talk to the ex-wife. It's more, and by the way, it's not common that FBI backgrounds are given to every single person on the committees. So that is not something that happens.
And in this case, it was the chair and ranking member, right?
Correct, which is
that
very
typical
normal.
Procedure,
yes. But so I remember when I went through my own personal background checks, I remember like a random person in college that I barely knew was called, but not like my college roommate,
That's
so it's like that's what they do.
Yeah.
So it doesn't bother me as much.
Well, important knowing that this has been a point of controversy, and I suspect will be for all of these confirmation hearings. Kailey, Donald Trump didn't want any of them to have FBI background checks at one point.
Well, yeah, they weren't signing those typical transition documents in order to speed this process along. Just quickly here, though, on the president-elect, Jeanne, it was pointed out by Senator Gary Peters during the course of his questioning that there were 5 either confirmed or acting secretaries of defense in the first Trump administration. Even if Pete Hegseth is able to get the votes and be confirmed, should we have more confidence this time around that he'll be able to stick in that job?
Oh, I don't know. Donald Trump likes to fire people. We've seen that. He's done it on TV. So, I'm not sure they'll stick, but that's the president's prerogative. So Pete Hegseth, if he's confirmed, could be the first of just a few.
Boy, well, I guess we'll see about that. Jeanne, thank you so much. Jeanne Zaino. Ashley Davis with us here at the table in Washington. I can't imagine going through the process, the full FBI background check.
When she said random people from college, I shook. That proposition is terrifying.
It's why you don't lie. You do say what you did,
You have to warn all your family and friends, though, right? Hey, you might be getting a phone call.
That's what I did, and none of them got the phone calls. It was the third layer that got the phone calls.
The ones you would
nice
least
to people.
expect.
Yes, at every stage. What a great panel.
You're listening to the Bloomberg Balance of Power podcast. Catch us live weekdays at noon and 5 p.m. Eastern on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto with the Bloomberg Business app. Listen on demand wherever you get your podcasts or watch us live on YouTube.
Watching Wall Street as we cover politics, they frequently cross over. It's a little bit different today, although there has been a conversation about defense contracting, the DIB, and of course, reforming procurement at the Pentagon as part of Pete Hegseth's wide-ranging conversation before the Senate Armed Services Committee. That hearing is still underway, but just about to conclude, with 27 senators each taking their time to ask questions of Donald Trump's nominee to run the Defense Department. Kailey, at times it has been about cultural issues, some of the allegations that have surrounded Hegseth, including his personal behavior when it comes to women, when it comes to alcohol, DEI, women in combat, but also just the hard brass tacks of managing a massive bureaucracy, the massive budget that you'd be in control of, managing people, which is experience that he does not have, though he seems to have convinced a lot of Republicans that he can do the job.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've heard a lot of numbers throughout the course of this hearing. The idea that the Pentagon, the Department of Defense, does have 3 million people. It has a budget of $850 billion. These are really big figures that we're working with. We've also heard over the course of this hearing, including from Senator Joni Ernst, for example, and from Hegseth himself, about a desire to get some of those figures down, specifically on the dollar figure side, as we talk about the auditing process at the Pentagon, or perhaps the lack thereof. It's those kind of internal substantive issues that we want to get into now with our next guest. Dr. Anja Manuel is joining us. She's co-founder of the strategic consulting firm Rice, Hadley, Gates and Manuel, also executive director of the Aspen Strategy Group. Welcome to Balance of Power, Anja. Good to have you here on Bloomberg TV and radio. When we consider the kind of size and scale of that internal DOD challenge that Pete Hegseth is making the case he is able to take on here, if he is indeed confirmed to be the next Secretary of Defense, just how hard is it going to be to actually execute, and in the period of just 4 years?
Yeah, happy to be with you, Kailey. Thanks for having me on. You stated all the numbers. This is an enormous department to run, the biggest department that the U.S. government has. So real experience running large bureaucracies is important. Let me give you 2 points. One, the outside challenges that the United States faces. This is really a more dangerous period we haven't faced since, frankly, between the two world wars. Great powers are acting badly. You're dealing with a rising China that needs to be managed. You're dealing with a Russia that is continuing to pommel Ukraine unjustly. You have Iran, which is currently on its back foot, but can always cause trouble. So there are enormous geopolitical challenges that the next Secretary of Defense will have to face without getting us substantially involved in any of these wars, as we currently are not. On the internal side, you said a lot, and apparently it's come up in the hearing. This is an enormous budget. One of the big things that will have to happen is the procurement of the Pentagon will need to be reformed. We are not currently buying the weapons that we need for the wars of the 21st century. That alone is a $142 billion budget. Very, very important. And in my experience, working with the Pentagon and with others, you need to bring the people of an organization along if you're going to make real change inside an organization. If you just do it by fiat from above, they'll fight you every step of the way.
Let's put a finer point on reforming procurement here, because Joe Biden just named the next two aircraft carriers for Bill Clinton and for George W. Bush. Is that in itself part of the reform that needs to happen? We keep hearing from Elon Musk, it should be all unmanned. It should be drones from now on. But we have massive and very expensive weapons programs that are set to continue on for years. So where does the reform begin?
Yeah, we do. There's lots of opinions on how you reform. It's been tried multiple times. I think the Biden administration deserves some credit for doing things like the replicator program, which is getting drones and unmanned vehicles much faster into our system. But these are still small things. You can't just scrap the large weapon systems wholeheartedly, but you can start trimming some of them, cutting the ones that are likely to be sitting ducks. There's going to be a huge, I don't want to get into the details of this because there are going to be huge debates on what do you cut, what do you not cut. Every time you try to cut any big procurement weapon system, people crawl out of the woodwork because those are good jobs in America in certain districts. And so you need to have a good relationship with the US Congress to do some of those things. I would say one of the most effective secretaries of defense we have had is my own current business partner, Bob Gates. He cut billions in over 10 years from the Pentagon budget, and he did it without ruffling too many of the feathers.
Well, obviously, as we consider the budget and what exactly it pays for, a lot of that is heading into the defense industrial base, which you were just speaking to. Obviously, a lot of this is made in the U.S., and this has come to the fore of conversation in regard to the supply of ammunition and other weapon systems for Ukraine. It was argued that that really is an investment in the defense industrial base here at home, even though we're sending it elsewhere. How much progress really has been made when it comes, though, to the DIB, Anja, versus what actually needs to be done to fortify the U.S.'s ability to continue providing for its own defense and the defense of its allies?
Yeah, very good question. Hard to quantify it. Boy, if we started at zero, we're now maybe 30-40% of the way there, but more has to happen. What's always very difficult is to tell companies to ramp up production without having very clear contracts going far into the future about how that will be used. And that's going to continue to be a problem. And the next administration will have to continue to wrestle with it. I would say the Biden administration has made a really pretty good start here.
Are senators asking any of the right questions today?
I have only watched part of the hearings. I do hear a lot of substance, a lot of what you said in your preview. This is a large organization, 3 million people. It needs to be run well. You can't just break the system in order to rebuild it. You have to really manage it from within. And by the way, the department is doing a lot of really important tasks right now, and you can't take your eye off that ball. So I do think some of the questions that have been asked about Indo-Pacific security, how we continue our work with our allies in the Indo-Pacific, which I think is one of the great strengths of what the Biden administration did, really rebuilding those alliances with Japan, with Korea, with the Philippines, with Australia, with India. Those are all very important, and I do hope the next Secretary of Defense keeps those going.
Well, of course, Pete Hegseth would like it to be him. We are looking here on Bloomberg TV and on YouTube at a live shot of the hearing room, which has just, of course, concluded the hearing itself. And Pete Hegseth, along with his wife by his side, are now sharing hugs with a few members inside the room. Anja, some of what we heard from Pete Hegseth today in regard to the operations of the Pentagon, and especially when he was under question from senators on his views around things like DEI or women in combat, was this notion that some of these initiatives that we have seen in recent years, whether it is allowing more equal gender opportunity or keeping diversity, equity, and inclusion in mind, that it was slowing down the Pentagon or somehow making the Department of Defense less able to be the most lethal fighting force in the world. Is there any real truth in that statement that these other initiatives that were described in this hearing as being politically oriented issues are actually affecting the defense capability of the United States?
I don't have the in-depth knowledge to evaluate whether that's been harmful or helpful or neither. When I interact with, as an outsider, with our troops around the world, with our military leaders around the world, I find them engaged and strong and smart and practical. And I think our military leaders are doing an extraordinary job managing a really complex geopolitical environment. And I just want to get back to that, because if you look at the challenges we're facing now, we talked briefly about the Indo-Pacific. The Ukraine war, even if President Trump would like it to end on day one of his presidency, that's unlikely. You need to bring that conflict to a managed conclusion. And that involves working well with our allies. I know that the Supreme Allied Commander we currently have in Europe has done a great job with that. So that continues. What's going on in the Middle East is ending, but very slowly. You need to continue to manage Hezbollah. You need to manage the conflict in Gaza with Israel. So supporting our military to the best of our ability is going to be a very important thing, both for the Congress and for the new civilians in the administration.
There's been a lot of talk about same-day confirmations, or day one confirmations, I should say. Will Pete Hegseth be among them, assuming that Democrats play along or Republicans have the vote on January 20th, confirmed to be the next secretary?
I can't speculate to that. You'll have to continue to hear the hearings. Yeah.
Well, when we consider, though, the urgency senators may feel, or that the president may feel, in making sure that these and him and other nominees are confirmed quickly, it does speak to some of the very things that you were just discussing with us. This notion that we are at a very tense time geopolitically in many parts of the world. There has been a lot of conversation, including just yesterday here at Bloomberg, when the outgoing U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan joined our colleague, about this notion that the Biden administration initially came in wanting to be able to focus on the Indo-Pacific, on the threat from China, and got instead sidelined by the events in the Middle East. How do you see the kind of balance between these different theaters heading into this next administration over the course of the next 4 years, especially if there is some kind of at least temporary resolution between Israel and Hamas that all sides are fighting for right now?
Yeah, the Middle East just draws people back in over and over again. And as much as repeated U.S. administrations have wanted to wash their hands of it and walk away, unfortunately, we need to be engaged. That doesn't mean directly involved in war, but we need to be engaged in the world to prevent wars, to keep us from having to be directly involved, because the international geopolitical system hates a vacuum. And every time there's a vacuum, it's filled, frankly, by the bad guys, like you saw Russia filling in Syria. You've seen Russia invade Ukraine. You've seen an increasingly belligerent China that we need to be watching. So we don't have the leisure as leaders in the United States to turn away from any of these very important conflicts. We need to be engaged in all of them. And if you talk to our friends and partners around the world, they want us to continue to be engaged.
All right, Dr. Anja Manuel, co-founder of the strategic consulting firm Rice, Hadley, Gates, Manuel, we thank you so much. Thanks for listening to the Balance of Power podcast. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already at Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can find us live every weekday from Washington, D.C. at noontime Eastern at Bloomberg.com.